Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. There are two types of neighbors, the ones who borrow your ladder and the ones who call the cops over a wooden footbridge. Got lucky with the second type. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. 60-year-old bridge that started a neighbor war. I'm changing names and a few small details. The world's small, and people with big mouths love recognizing themselves in someone else's story. Behind my house, past the garden and an old apple tree, there was a little creek. Not a river, just a narrow ribbon of water whispering over stones, like it was repeating the same word all day. In summer, you could cross it in sneakers if you knew where to place your feet, and in winter you could walk over the ice like it was a sidewalk. But my grandpa didn't believe in just hopping across. He was the kind of man who built things not because you had to, but because that's how things were supposed to be done. When I was little, he built a small wooden footbridge over that creek, simple, tidy, with handrails, made of oak. Not pine that rots in 2 seasons, but real oak, the kind that lasts as long as the world feels like standing. He carved modest patterns into the rails, nothing fancy, but full of care. Leaves, waves, 2 little fish, and in one corner a tiny D, like a signature. Every year, as soon as the weather warmed up, he'd show up with a can of wood protectant, a brush, and the patient face of a man who couldn't understand how anyone lived without proper maintenance. Wood, he used to say, is like relationships. If you don't take care of it, it turns gray and cracks. If you do take care of it, it'll serve you for a long time. Quietly. That bridge stood for almost 60 years. It darkened, sure. Oak gets deeper and richer over time, like it absorbs the years. But the boards didn't squeak, the rails were solid, and under your feet it still felt as steady as it did when I was a kid. Past the bridge was a path to the lake. A small lake tucked in the woods where you could skip stones, catch frogs with your hands, eat sandwiches off your knee, and remember that life isn't just work, bills, and other people's drama. It's water, sun, and kids laughing. For a long time, no one lived out there. On the far side was wildland, an old road that once belonged to heavy equipment and later became just over there. No fences, no signs. I grew up understanding that the creek might be a boundary on paper, but it wasn't a boundary in real life. Nobody complained, nobody cared, and the bridge was just a bridge. Then the years passed. One summer, a tractor showed up on the far side, then a construction crew, then the smell of fresh concrete. The land was sold. Development, new homes, infrastructure improvements. You know the words. I shrugged and figured, fine, people will live there. Maybe they'll even be normal neighbors. And for the first few weeks, they were. A guy in his 40s with a little gut and an easy smile, and his wife with a sharp chin, hair parted perfectly, and that unmistakable look that said, I'm always right. They waved across the creek while I was mowing. Hey, the guy shouted, we just moved in. I'm Rick. Welcome, I called back. I've been here a long time. If you need anything, just say the word. The wife nodded like she was doing me a favor. We're glad there's finally someone here, she said. This area has potential. People like that usually don't mean potential like peace and quiet. They mean I'm about to run my own little kingdom. And the first thing that annoys them is anything they can't control. The problem started with the bridge. One day, walking back from the lake with my kids, I saw Rick and his wife standing on their side of the creek, staring at the bridge like it was something dirty. Afternoon, I said, trying to stay polite. The wife didn't even smile. Is that yours? She nodded at the bridge. It was my grandpa's, I said. He built it back in the 60s. She dragged out. You realize it, how do I put this? Looks very rural. Rick chuckled awkwardly. Honey, he said, is just asking. We invested a lot in the house, and the bridge ruins your view, I asked. She gave me that look people wear when they want to insult you but pretend it's concern. It affects our property value. It's like an outside structure, and it's, illegal? For a second, I didn't even have words. Illegal, I repeated. It's on my land, on my side, on my bank. But it leads to our side, she said, and her tone was, got you. It leads to the path to the lake, I said. I've walked it for 20 years. My kids walk it. Nobody ever had a problem. She shrugged. Well, now we live here, and we do. My kids looked up at me like I was supposed to do something, right? I rested a hand on my son's head. Okay, I said calmly, if you have a concern, let's handle it like adults. I can show you the property lines and the documents. The bridge is on my side, and I'm not tearing it down just because you don't like the color of old oak. Rick stepped forward like he wanted to smooth things over. Look, we don't want problems. Maybe you could paint it or make it more modern. It's oak, I said. You don't paint oak, you protect it. The wife raised an eyebrow. Then we'll have to contact the proper authorities. The first call came a week later. I came home from work to a police car in my driveway, 2 officers, one older, one younger. Evening, sir, the older one said. We got a complaint about an unauthorized structure over a waterway, a bridge. I sighed. It's my grandfather's footbridge. It's been there for 60 years, and it's on my land. The officer glanced at his partner like, another one of these? Do you have property documents, he asked. Of course, I said. I'll grab them. I brought out a folder with the boundaries, the plan, the old description. They looked it over, turned a few pages, and sighed again. Looks like the bridge is on your side, the older officer said, and it's a small structure. We don't see a violation here. Thank you, I said. And right then, from the bushes on the far side, the wife appeared like she'd been waiting for her cue. She stood there where she could be seen and raised her voice so the officers could hear. You're kidding me. You're just leaving it? It's dangerous. It could collapse. Children walk on that thing. I lifted a hand. That's why I maintain it, I said, unlike your imagination. The older officer turned toward her and said, flat and firm, Ma'am, we've looked into it. If you have a private dispute about property boundaries, that's a civil matter. Her lips tightened. Fine. Then we'll handle it the civil way. When someone can't win with rules, they try to win with nerves, complaints, calls, pressure. It's not about the law. It's about making you crack first. After that came 2 more complaints, one about environmental violations, another about flood risk due to obstruction of water flow. I actually laughed when I heard that. Sir, one officer told me later, a different one this time, you wouldn't believe what people make up. I believe, I said. I've learned to believe it. I tried talking to them like normal humans. One afternoon I walked over while they were sitting on their porch. Let's be real, I said. I don't want a war. It's a footbridge, not a tank. It's been there for decades. What do you actually want? The wife set her mug down like she was placing a period at the end of a sentence. I want it gone. It looks cheap, and it gives people access to our side. What people, I asked. Foxes? Rick cleared his throat. Honey's just worried about safety. You know, if someone crosses. Crosses to where? I gestured. To your woods? That road goes to the lake. It's not your backyard. It's not your pool. That's not the point, she snapped. The point is control. And that's when it clicked. It wasn't about the bridge. It was about the fact that it existed without her permission. Then they did something so stupid, I honestly thought it had to be a joke. It was a normal morning. I drove out to grab coffee and came back half an hour later. I turned into my driveway and saw Rick's pickup parked near the creek, hood up, and chaos in the grass. Rick had his phone out and the wife was waving her arms like an orchestra conductor. I stopped. What's going on? I asked. They turned and her face wore the kind of satisfaction people get 1 second before karma slaps them. We decided to remove this bridge, she said. You what? I stepped out slowly. Rick went red. It's kind of on our side too. It's not on your side, I said, and you're not touching it. She flicked her hand dismissively. It doesn't have permits, so I walked closer and saw a tow strap tied around the bridge rail, the other end attached to the pickup's bumper. Are you serious? I asked, my voice no longer polite. Rick muttered, we thought it would just come loose. It's oak, and my grandfather built it by hand, I said. You're not about to rip the bridge. You're about to rip your own brain out. She shouted at Rick, go, pull it. Rick got in, hit the gas. A moment of silence. Then crack. But the bridge didn't crack. The bumper did. It tore clean off like it was barely holding on in the first place. The pickup lunged, the bumper stayed behind, hanging from the strap, and Rick stepped out of the truck looking like he'd just lost a chess match to a pigeon. I watched the wife open her mouth and find no words. You, she started. You just damaged your own vehicle, I said calmly. And you tried to damage my property. Touch that bridge again and I'm calling the police. Our lawyers, she began. "You've called the police 3 times," I cut in. "Now it's my turn." She clenched her jaw and hissed, "This isn't over." I met her eyes and said, "I know. That's why I'm going to be ready." That's the moment when a civil dispute starts smelling like criminal behavior. Normal people argue with paperwork, not toe straps and bumpers. That same day, I installed a camera. Back then, home cameras weren't a normal set-it-and-forget-it thing. They weren't cheap kits in every big box store. People had alarm systems, maybe motion sensors, but I worked security. Cameras were my profession. Wiring, angles, night modes, DVR recording, the right lenses. And I knew one simple truth. When someone says, "This isn't over," it usually means, "I'm going to do something dumb and you should get it on video." I mounted the camera under the roofline where it wasn't obvious from the ground. It covered the bridge and part of the creek bank. Night vision wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. Silhouettes, movement, faces if they got close. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Maybe they cooled off. Maybe they were just waiting. Then their cousin showed up. He came around often, big, round, the face of a man who always looked slightly sweaty. I think his name was Todd, but in my head he was just the cousin. He liked pretending he was tough. A few times I saw him by the road smoking and staring toward my place. "Hey," he shouted once when I was carrying firewood. "At your bridge? Cute. Like something out of those, redneck movies." "It's my grandfather's bridge," I said, "and it's not here for your commentary." The cousin puffed his chest like he was about to say something threatening, then suddenly grinned. "Relax, man, I'm joking." And he backed off like a crab. That was his whole act. He'd step up, pretend he was the big guy, toss out a line like, "If I were you," and then immediately bail out with, "I'm just kidding, don't be so serious." One day we crossed paths at the store and he decided to perform for an audience. "Oh look, it's the bridge guy," he said loud, checking if anyone was listening. "I'm just buying milk," I replied. He winked. "Just make sure your bridge doesn't accidentally burn down." I froze. "What?" I said. He threw his hands up instantly. "Dude, it's a joke. You don't understand humor?" And he walked off fast, a little too fast, like someone who just said too much and realized it. People who joke about arson are usually testing your reaction. It's a little beacon. If I really do it, will you be able to prove it? That evening, I walked across the bridge again. I ran a hand along the rail like you'd pet an old dog. The oak was warm from the sun. "Hang in there," I muttered, not even sure if I was talking to the bridge or myself. Then one night, I woke up to sirens. You know that sound when it's not somewhere in the city but close, when it cuts through the dark so hard you sit up before you even know where you are? I stumbled to the window and saw flashing lights through the trees, red strobes, smoke. "What is that?" My wife sat up. "I don't know," I said, pulling on pants. "Stay here, I'm going to go look." I ran outside barefoot into cold dew and headed for the creek. The bridge was on fire. The flames weren't huge, but they were enough, licking the boards, climbing the rails. Smoke rolled, thick and heavy, and there was that unmistakable gasoline smell. You never forget it once you've smelled it. Firefighters were already there. Someone down the road had seen the glow and called it in. 2 guys in helmets dragged a hose into position. "Back up," one of them shouted. "Move back." I stood there watching water slam into the wood, watching my grandfather's work blacken and break apart. It wasn't just sad. It felt like someone set fire to a family photo album. The same older officer from before jogged over. "Sir, are you the owner?" he asked. I nodded, trusting my voice as little as I trusted my hands. "This is arson," I said, "and I'm pretty sure I know who." "Did you see it?" he asked. I looked him in the eye and said the one thing he definitely didn't expect to hear back then. "I have a camera." He blinked. "A camera?" "On the house, pointed at the bridge. It records." His expression shifted from neighbor drama to, "Oh, this matters." "Can you show me?" he asked. I ran back home, found the DVR in the utility room, and rewound the footage. On the screen, night, grainy gray, then a figure appears carrying a gas can. He looks around, walks onto the bridge, pours, flicks a lighter, a flare of flame, he backs away and runs. When the officer looked up, I already knew. "That's," he started. "Their cousin," I said. "That guy." He pulled out a notepad. "Can you preserve the footage?" "I can make a copy," I said. "Tape, disc, whatever you need." "Do it," he said. "And thank you for having a camera." Back then, a home camera wasn't a toy. It was like a Swiss Army knife. Not everyone had one, but when you needed it, it cut straight through every he said, she said argument. They picked up the cousin the next morning. It wasn't even dramatic. The officer called me. "Sir, we found him. He's not very bright." "That tracks," I said. "He's already talking," the officer added. "A lot." When I came to the station to give my statement, I saw the cousin through the glass in the interview room. He sat hunched over, looking less like a tough guy and more like a soaked paper bag. The officer met me in the hallway. "He's admitting to the arson," he said, "and he claims it wasn't his idea." "Of course," I said. "He says your neighbor," the officer checked his notes, "Mrs. Grayson gave him a bottle of whiskey, a case of beer, and $300. I didn't even feel surprised, just that cold, clean feeling of, there it is. "He named her directly?" I asked. "Directly," the officer said, and he said she told him, "Make the bridge disappear." His words. This is why hiring a coward is the worst plan. Their bravery ends the moment consequences show up, and then they sell you out cheaper than you paid them. They brought me in to confirm the bridge was mine. It had been there for decades, and there was prior conflict. I told them everything, the complaints, the police calls, the pickup stunt, and the missing bumper. "They really tried to yank a bridge with a pickup?" the younger detective asked, like he couldn't believe humans were this stupid. "Yep," I said, "ripped their own bumper off." The detective couldn't stop himself from smiling. That's unbelievably dumb." "I know," I said. "I thought the same thing, but now the bridge is ash." As I was leaving, they walked Mrs. Grayson into the hallway, chin up, posture stiff, that same expression that said, "You're gonna regret this." She saw me and stopped. "Oh," she said, sweet and poisonous, "are you happy now?" I looked at her for a long moment. In my head, I saw my grandpa brushing the rails, my kids running toward the lake, smoke and sirens in the dark. "No," I said quietly, "I'm not happy. I'm tired." She smiled like she'd won anyway. "You can't prove anything," she said. "It's the word of a drunk." The officer next to her cleared his throat and said, calm enough to sound dangerous, "Ma'am, we have video. We have your prior complaints, and we have his statement about being paid. I suggest you speak to an attorney." And stop talking. Her face went pale for a split second. She started. "Talk to an attorney," the officer repeated. She turned and walked away, not quite as confident now. I went home and stared at the burned remains where the bridge had been. My kids stood next to me. "Dad," my daughter whispered, "are we never going to the lake again?" I crouched down and looked her in the eyes. "We are," I said, "and we're going to build a new bridge, an even better one." "Like Grandpa's?" my son asked. I nodded. "Like Grandpa's. And we're going to make it so nobody can burn it down." A few months later, the court ordered restitution. The cousin got his consequences. And weirdly enough, he felt like the smallest villain in the story. He was just a coward with an empty head. But her? She didn't just lose a case, she lost control. And here's the most ironic part. When my friends and I rebuilt the bridge, I used oak again, but I reinforced it with hidden metal supports inside the structure. And yes, I kept the carving. I even added new details. 2 little fish like my grandpa's, and beside them a small D, because some things can't be burned away with gasoline. And I installed a second camera. And a third. Not because I was afraid, but because after that I learned something. Some people don't respect boundaries until they see themselves crossing them on video. When the new bridge was finished, I walked my kids to the lake again. We paused halfway across, and I stood still for a moment, listening to the creek. "Your grandpa would be proud," my wife said softly. I nodded. He'd say, "There, now it's done right." The lesson's simple and very adult. Evidence weighs more than emotions. And the best revenge isn't yelling. It's a new bridge that outlasts their spite. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.